Hello out there and welcome to another fabulous episode of Passion for the Paranormal, bringing a passion for the paranormal to you. I'm your host, Curry Stegan, and I've got another great show in store for you. I really think you're going to like the discussion tonight, and I think you're really going to like the guest who's joining me. But before I get into that, if you haven't already been over to the Facebook page, please head over to facebook.com/passion4 the paranormal, and like and follow the page there for me. And if you're using the iTunes app, really, if you could really do me a big favor by heading over there and subscribing and giving me a quick review of the show. That's really going to help people to find the show and really help me to continue to move the show forward. So I'd really appreciate your help with that if you could just spend a minute over there doing a quick review. So if you have been on the Facebook page recently, you've probably seen a link to an event coming up on the 28th of July. It is the Wendover Airfield Paranormal Experience, and this is being put on by the Dead History. I'm so excited about this event. I'm going to be participating in it, and I'm going to be leading groups to 4 different locations on the airfield. There's so much rich history at this location, going back to World War II and all the bomber crews that trained there. Even as part of the missions they flew, the atomic bomb missions they flew over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, some of those missions, some of the planning for those missions went on there at Wendover Airfield. So there's so much rich history there, a lot of reported activity going on there. It's going to be a great event, and it's really the first time that anyone's been given this kind of access to these number of locations at the airfield. So what a great event it's going to be. You can get your tickets at thedeadhistory.com. You can visit my Facebook page and link in from there. And still a lot of tickets on sale. Get your tickets for the event. They'll go quick. It is going to be a great event. Again, I'm very excited to be participating in that. All right, so once again, I mentioned I've got a great guest on the show tonight. Never had anybody with his kind of background on the show before, so it's pretty amazing. It's Brandon Massullo, and Brandon is the author of the book, The Ghost Studies. He's also got a lot of experience in clinical therapy and is a parapsychologist, so he's got an amazing background. He's going to be talking about the book and a little bit about his viewpoints and theories on haunted activity and ghostly encounters. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get into discussion with Brandon. I really hope you enjoy the show tonight. Okay, so I'm here with Brandon Massullo, and Brandon is a clinical therapist, a parapsychologist, and he has been a participant in and featured speaker at numerous paranormal forums and events. He studied psychology and parapsychology at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and his research has been cited in numerous parapsychological journals, articles, and mainstream books. He is the author of the 2017 book, The Ghost Studies, New Perspectives on the Origins of Paranormal Experiences. Brandon, thank you so much for joining me on the show tonight.
Thanks for having me, Curry.
No, it's an honor, Brandon, and it's amazing to have somebody of your caliber and with your academic pedigree. Parapsychology, wow, what an amazing field. Maybe if you could just take us back to, how this crazy thing started for you. Well, maybe let me back up even further. Maybe if you could just explain a little bit from your perspective what parapsychology is and how you got involved in researching this crazy and fascinating thing we call the paranormal.
Sure. Parapsychology is it's basically a branch of psychology, but with parapsychology, you kind of get to study a lot of the what I like to consider the cool phenomenon, and that's basically the paranormal. So parapsychology is a field of study concerned with the investigation of the paranormal and psychic phenomenon as well. And what it's really called is psi phenomenon, and that kind of includes telepathy, precognition, clairvoyance, psychokinesis, which is moving things with your mind, near-death experiences, reincarnation, and the thing called the survival hypothesis or apparitional experiences, which basically means, once we die, some part of us goes on to live, whether that's consciousness, whether that's spirits, whether that's numerous other things. The idea that some part of us survives after death. Now, obviously, a lot of academics in neuropsychology would say that, we're mostly, as humans, we're sort of machines, like computers. We're made up of circuitry, electricity, and then once the machine stops working, we cease to exist. The survival hypothesis basically says, well, something goes on after we die. And that's something else that parapsychologists study too, so ghostly experiences, apparitional experiences. But basically, it's the scientific study of the interactions between living organisms and sort of the external environment. And I think that parapsychology has been around for a long time, most notably since the 50s with the Duke University and the Rhine Center. There's not a lot of parapsychologists in the States. It seems to be more prevalent overseas in the UK, some in Germany, Spain, I think, as well. But still, it's a pretty fascinating field. If you ever have a chance to sit down and just read, like an introduction to parapsychology, or there's numerous books on parapsychology out there, I think a lot of your listeners would really, really enjoy it.
Interesting. So can you kind of touch on what is the reason why, because you mentioned it's not a huge field, parapsychology, here in the United States, but it is a little bit more prevalent overseas in Europe. What do you think the reason for that is?
I don't know. It's sometimes, I've been told that there's not a lot of funding for research in parapsychology. And if there's no funding and grants, then usually universities don't have staff that research that. It's kind of a controversial branch of psychology as well. You're studying things that a lot of mainstream society doesn't think exist, like the telepathy and the precognition. So there's some avenues of it being a pseudoscience to a lot of people as well, which is not true. There is a overwhelming amount of research out there indicating that we do have psi abilities like telepathy, precognition. But it just never really caught on in the States. In the 70s, there was a lot of universities that had some staff doing it, but it kind of filtered out. I think overseas, this idea of parapsychology is a little bit more accepted. There's numerous, like the University of Edinburgh where I went, that's a top 25 university. Charles Darwin went there. They cloned the sheep dolly there. So, it's a pretty prominent university, and they have academics or professors who teach parapsychology and do research there. I just think it's more accepted, and they're more open to the idea of this happening. I get asked that question a lot, and I really don't know. I think the States is kind of getting there. We started to see some parapsychology research filter in some of the mainstream journals, academic journals. I think a lot of this talk recently with consciousness that's going on with physicists and even neuropsychologists, consciousness sort of realms on that, or teeters on that parapsychological discipline. So it's kind of being used, but it's not being called parapsychology. So that's my long-winded answer of saying I don't really know.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the paranormal field, I don't want to say specifically parapsychology, but in the paranormal field, which I've been in for a while, but you're starting to hear a lot more talk about things like quantum physics and mechanics and that sort of discussion weaving in with the paranormal phenomena, which I think is interesting. To me, that kind of suggests that it's becoming a little bit more mainstream. But I don't know. What do you think? Is that kind of? Do you think that's an indication that it's opening up a little bit more? I mean, it certainly does on the UFO phenomena.
Yeah, I think so. I think that quantum physics or it's such a, when you say that, it's such a vague thing, but for the most part, I think that it is becoming a lot more mainstream, and I think that this entanglement, this being connected at distances, synchronizing, this all has to do somewhat with quantum physics. And I think that, now with Twitter and Facebook, these articles are popping up on a daily basis. So we're reading more about it, and we're sharing it, and it's dispersing more to the general public than it was maybe 15, 20 years ago. And I think with that interest comes more research into it, more books being published about it, more TV shows discussing it. So then it becomes more widespread. But yeah, I do think, because, listen, 15 years ago you would never read an article where a physicist or a neuropsychologist discusses the possibility of consciousness, which is, being our who we are, ourself, our personality, awareness type things might not be located inside the brain. It might be located outside the brain. So these things are getting definitely more widestream attention, and I think that's I'm biased, but I think that's a really good thing.
Absolutely. No, I agree. So you've earned graduate degrees in research and clinical psychology, and kind of help us understand how you feel that helps you with delving into the paranormal.
Well, parapsychology, which is, like we talked about, the study of all this paranormal phenomenon, it really gives you a healthy dose of how to conduct psychological research, or just research in general. So basically, when I went to the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, I got a lot of my courses were basically on psychological research methods. So that's understanding research, that's developing research, that's knowing statistics, hypotheses, data analysis, procedures, measurements. These are the type of things they really teach you over there. And you want to just get a strong foundation on that, and then you sort of branch off into learning a little bit more about, psi and ESP. And I think that those types of avenues are really helpful when it comes to studying the paranormal. Because I have a mix in clinical psychology, clinical psychology is just face-to-face counseling, for depression, anxiety, evaluations, assessments, those types of things. I think my education in clinical and research really helps me out when it comes to the paranormal. I really think it's a nice mix. So anytime you conduct any sort of investigation, or even just go to a haunted location, there's numerous factors that are involved, not only the environment, but who we are internally, our personalities, and what's important, and I've heard this numerous times in the paranormal field, is, you have to get your data and your baseline readings, and you have to really just be familiar with all your equipment, your surroundings. These are all parts of psychology and parapsychology, and to some degree the paranormal, the people who go out on the weekends and do the paranormal investigation. But I think having a strong background in the clinical and in the research really helps me better understand what's going on. But, when you're out there, when you're in a haunted location, one of the things that I think we're all looking for is that experience, that interaction with something that we can't explain. So at the heart of it, we're all seeking sort of the same disposition or end result.
Right. And you mentioned the paranormal investigator, kind of the weekend warrior type of paranormal investigator, and I guess I kind of fall in that category. I don't even know if it would be, every weekend. It's more like once or twice a month. I guess what I appreciate and really what I think is amazing is the kind of research that people in your field do, because I think you're the ones that really push this field forward more than any other paranormal investigators can, because you have a scientific approach to it. And as a paranormal investigator, it's impossible for us to really use scientific methods to be doing this when we're doing it 1 weekend a month, or a couple of weekends out of a month, and we just don't have the time to devote to it. It's a part-time thing for us and a hobby. So you really approach it from an objective and a professional standpoint, and I think that really helps to move the field forward. So a lot of what we already have in terms of theories and stuff to work with, I think, was probably developed in your field. So, I can really appreciate that. One of the things that you touched on in the book is when you were at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, you conducted a lot of research at a pretty notorious haunted location in Scotland. I guess it's called Mary King's Close. And can you talk a little bit about that location and the kind of research you did and experiences you had there?
Yeah, Mary King's Close is located in Edinburgh's Royal Mile, and it's been featured on a lot of television shows, Ghost Hunters International, Most Haunted, Cities of the Underworld. Pretty much every TV show, I think, has been there. And Mary King's Close basically consists of underground apartments and businesses that were used during the 1600s. And Mary King's Close is shrouded in myths, urban legends, supposedly many murders. They walled up the people who had the plague down there in the 1600s, and they were kind of left for dead. But it's basically, if you want to think about it, like an underground businesses and cities. And as with most stories, it's unclear how much is actually true. Well, what is true is that this location has countless reports of haunt-type phenomenon or ghostly encounters. And, it's when I did my research over in Scotland, I was looking at sort of these individuals who are more prone to ghostly experiences. However, their increased probability of having ghostly encounters has nothing really to do with, psychic abilities or being sensitive in that way, but rather something as simple and concrete as the ability to taste, touch, and smell. And what I'm talking about is a subset of the population that's what's been called environmentally sensitive. And when I say that, I want to make clear that environmental sensitivity is not related to psychic sensitivity. Those who claim to be psychics sort of believe they can communicate with the deceased, like Chick Coffey, Sylvia Brown, those types.
Right.
But those who are classified as environmentally sensitive are simply just affected by the surrounding environment to a higher degree than the normal population. So you, me, everyone, we're all affected by and we react to the environment differently. And it's been suggested that sometimes the environment affects certain individuals more than others. And this kind of leads to conditions and dysfunctions within the individual. So if we think about, we all can taste food, but there's some individuals who are called super tasters who experience the sense of taste with greater intensity than the general population. I've seen and I've heard of these people who can put, how M&Ms are different colors, but they all basically taste the same to 99% of the population. But these people who are super tasters could be blindfolded and they could basically tell what color M&M they're eating. So whether it's a green or red or blue, because they can taste the very small dye in that. So they're really, really sensitive to that. And what's out there, there's these individuals who are environmentally sensitive who, from birth onward, register very slight differences or changes in the environment. So they're predisposed to a number of conditions and illnesses. So basically, they're distinguished by their sensitivity to low-level environmental stimuli. So what you're looking at is people who may have long-standing allergies, chronic pain, fatigue, migraine, sensitivity to light, sounds, and smells. So this is really what we're looking at. And what we found with these people who are really, really sensitive to the things that are happening in the environment, they also have way, way, way more paranormal experiences. So I think it turned out to be 70% of people who were environmentally sensitive had some type of paranormal or psychic phenomenon happen to them, which is a huge number. It's a huge, huge number. So what we did was I took 250 participants who were at Mary King's Close. I determined who was sensitive and who wasn't, and then they went through the haunted location. As they were going through, they had this checklist, and every time they had a ghostly encounter or paranormal phenomenon happen to them, they would check it off and write down what happened. So what we were trying to do was figure out if these environmentally sensitive people had more paranormal experiences in the past and during the haunted location. So I had 250 participants. Of those people, there were 601 reported experiences while touring Mary King's Close. So there are people having multiple experiences. And what we found out was these people who were sensitive had more past experiences, and they had more experiences while they were in Mary King's Close. So what we're looking at here is just finding out why these people are having more experiences than the general population. And so the research kind of went over that, and we kind of tried to figure out why that was. Now, are they better at sensing external magnetic fields that the general population can't? They have better antenna and biological radio, better biological radios, sensing psychic phenomenon better than the general public. I don't know. I think they could. There's a numerous theories on what could be happening, but that's really what my research focused on over there, and it kind of boils down to, while the general population has this ability to experience paranormal phenomenon, it is more likely sort of be detected among this special group, and that's what I really found out over there, and that's really what catapulted me into the book and everything else.
So interesting. While you were doing this research at the location, and I think you touched on this in the book a little bit, I think you said you really hadn't had anything that would be considered a significant paranormal experience. Anything that would even borderline be that while you were doing the research at the location that could be paranormal that you experienced yourself?
Yeah. So for the research, I had to do, part of my research involved gathering electromagnetic field readings. So I would have to take readings of Mary King's Close. I did it a week before, and then every morning before the participants came in, or every afternoon. So basically, when you get baseline readings, you just go into every room, and then you sort of just make sure everything's kosher. There's nothing out of whack. And for the most part, every day, all the readings were the same milligauss. Nothing was astronomical changes or anything. But there was one day when I was outside of one of the rooms at Mary King's Close that's supposedly haunted by this older gentleman. And as I was out there, I started to feel a little bit different. I started feeling almost like goosebumps and tingling. And then my EMF meter started to go a little bananas on me. And I couldn't figure out why. I mean, I've been taking base readings for, like I said, a week or 2 weeks before that. And I kept thinking to myself, this is weird. And it kept happening and happening. And I thought to myself at that moment, I was like, well, wait a minute, maybe this is something paranormal that's happening. So, so it's like that movie, or like the Ghostbusters movie, when they see the ghost. It's like, well, this is happening, now what do we do, So that's right. So I'm like, well, what do I do now, So I just sort of tried to experience it and tried to gather as much sensory information as I could. And then I ended up just walking back upstairs, coming back down and doing all the baseline readings, and they all came up normal for the next 2 times I came down. So I don't know what happened. I'm sure skeptics could say, well, maybe somebody turned the generator on, but I've been going there the same time every day, and I don't know. Maybe it was a paranormal experience. I didn't see like an apparitional ghost or anything like that, but I can't really explain it. And it's very similar to what a lot of paranormal investigators report when they have experiences. So I that's the closest I've really come to something.
Yeah,
it was a pretty cool experience.
And it's funny that you mentioned the apparitions, because I've been doing this for about 5 years now myself in paranormal investigation, and I'm yet to experience an apparition. I guess it depends on what your definition of an apparition is. To me, it's basically more or less an image of a person that maybe some would say is deceased. Maybe some wouldn't say that. I've actually witnessed shadows and that sort of thing, but nothing that I would consider a full-blown apparition. So I think that's a very rare occurrence, at least in my experience.
It really, you're right. You're 100% right. And when I did the research, like I mentioned, there were groups of people who went through the haunted location Mary King's Close, 250 some, and then there were 600 reports of paranormal experiences. when I broke that down, the most reported experience was change in temperature. So 29% people had a paranormal phenomenon of change in temperature. And then it was followed by dizziness, headaches, unexplainable sense of a presence was 9%. But visual apparitions accounted for less than 2%. So it's very, very rare to have a visual apparition. Even in the TV shows, you very rarely have someone seeing a visual apparition. Most of the time it's a EVP or a noise or a chill or walking into a room and feeling like a presence. So it is very, very rare to have that. So that's why I consider that to be such an amazing and life-changing experience to see like a full-blown visual, full-body apparition. It's such a unique and rare experience, even among those of us who, our daily lives are paranormal based.
Sure. And you talk about in the book several cases of ghostly encounters, paranormal experiences that people have shared with you. And I'm just wondering if you could share some of your favorite accounts from the book.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, what's great about the book is there's a mixture of a lot of things going on in there. But one of the things that I think is the best part is there's a lot of case studies in there. So these reports from people about their paranormal experiences, and they're sort of throughout the book. But towards the end, I start to do something that a lot of the books out there don't usually do, and that's sit down and explain maybe what's going on. And of the reports that I have, I can't remember how many are in there, but there's ones that sort of stick out, and there's ones that kind of blend in. But
right.
Let me pull up one, and then I'll go ahead and read it. This is actually one that reported to me. Here we go. No, this obviously isn't me. My father passed away quietly in the hospital around 3 p.m. that day. We'd had a very special relationship, and I definitely considered myself a daddy's girl. His passing was a shock to the whole family. Overwhelmed with sadness, worry, and fear, I laid down on the couch as soon as I got home that evening. It must have been around 8 p.m. when my encounter occurred. While lying on the couch, an overwhelming sense of comfort overcame me. As I sat up, I saw an image of my father. I wasn't shocked. I wasn't scared, just shocked. He walked toward me and whispered, "Don't be sad." He then rubbed my shoulders, which is what he would do to ease my sadness when I was a teenager. The encounter made me smile, even though it only lasted seconds, and then he slowly faded away. So to me, that's a pretty awesome experience, right? Able to connect with a person who was such a huge part of their lives, a visual apparition, almost life-changing. And when you hear something like that, not only does it tug at your heartstrings a little bit, but it makes you just fascinated by what possibly could happen, after we move on from this realm, what happens to our consciousness. And, I'm sure on your show you hear a lot of stories about ghosts, and usually they're negative, right?
Well, yeah, there's a fair amount of that.
Yeah, usually it's, I woke up and there's, a shadow figure or somebody moving across the room with blood all over their face. You know what I'm saying? It's usually negative. But a lot of these experiences that I came across sometimes were positive. So and even negative experiences can sometimes help people cope with life, and they don't all have to be negative. Like I think the TV shows, there's a little bit of entertainment behind the uncle haunting a room, or just the negative stuff, but it doesn't have to be that way. I'll share another one which I think is pretty good as well. Ava was 12 when she moved into a new house just outside of town. The house was small, however, one benefit was a huge attic bedroom. Her two brothers shared a room, and Ava had the whole attic bedroom to herself. Ava's parents would often overhear Ava talking while she was alone in her bedroom. They chalked it up to an imaginary friend and creative play. Things were good until Ava started to become frightened of her imaginary friend, calling him mean and scary. She decided to move out of the room. While moving things out of Ava's room, her mother reported the atmosphere in the room changed. She stated the air was heavy and she felt as if there was electricity in the air. It was at that moment that she, the mother, had seen what she described as an elderly man standing in the corner of the room. She ran downstairs, and currently no one in the family goes up into the attic. Strangely enough, there are times when the lights would flicker on and off throughout the night in the attic room. Neighbors would often call the family asking why they continue to turn their attic light off and on. So this is another pretty cool ghostly encounter as well, and it's got a lot of those characteristics that we sort of see in a lot of paranormal experiences. Lights flickering, visual apparitions, so electricity, that seems to be a common phenomenon a lot of times in these ghostly encounters as well.
Yeah, one of the stories that I thought was fascinating was the story about the son who went to Vietnam, and the mother had woken up in the middle of the night and was feeling, I kind of think it was along the lines of feeling a splitting headache, chest pains, having the sensation maybe of blood coming down the face. And then, if my memory serves me right, there was actually a audible message too from the son, and I thought that was a fascinating story. And you shared some other stories in there. And the interesting thing I think about this one was I think your theory behind that was that these may be messages being shared before the person actually they're going through the act of possibly dying. And they're experiencing this, emotional, they're seeing their life flash before their eyes, and, intense emotional trauma, and going through the experience of dying, and perhaps this message is transmitted prior to the person dying. And I thought that was interesting because a lot of the stories that you hear, those kinds of stories, usually most people assume that the person has already passed on before that message is shared. And I think there was another story you shared in the book with the guy and the wife. The wife had been in a car accident, but can you touch a little bit more about that? Because I think that's a fascinating thing.
Yeah. In a lot of these, you mentioned the soldier, and then the mother, and then the other one was the wife and the husband. And let me start off by talking about crisis apparitions. So we've all sort of heard stories about crisis apparitions, and those two that you brought up were actually crisis apparitions. And what they are sort of, you wake up, you see an apparition of your aunt standing in front of you, and she says, thanks for everything, but I gotta go. And then, you get a call the next morning saying that your aunt passed away the night before, right at the time that, she appeared in your bedroom. So this is what's a crisis apparition. It happens once. It's usually between family members, and it usually occurs within hours of the death. And it seems to be some sort of communication at that point. And I go over those things quite a bit in the book. There's numerous crisis apparitions that I discuss. And it ties to a lot of my theories that you talked about before about what happens and what can cause ghostly encounters. So the one you talked about with the husband and wife, right? Actually, pull that one up here. Believe it or not, my memory is, I can't recall the whole story.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of detail in some of them anyway, so that would seem to be tough to recount the entire.
Luckily, I have. That's another thing. Finding stuff sometimes. So I'll just tell you the story, and then we'll kind of go from there. John was sitting in his living room waiting for his wife Emily to come home from a girls' night out with some of her friends. I had gotten a text message from Emily stating that they were leaving the restaurant and would be home in 20 minutes. About an hour and a half had gone by with no word from Emily. I began to get extremely worried. However, I tried to remain calm. In an effort to distract myself, I went to my office and began to surf the internet. After a few minutes, I was absorbed in setting up my lineup for fantasy football team, which played the next day. Suddenly, I got chills throughout my body to the point where I noticed goosebumps. My heart was pounding, and I felt another presence was in the room. Filled with fear, I noticed on my right-hand side and slightly behind me a figure. I was too scared to turn my head, fearing that I was not prepared for what I would see. Summoning up the courage, I turned my head ever so slowly. I noticed a cloudy and transparent version of my wife. She was wearing the same clothes that she had left the house in earlier. However, they appeared disheveled and dirty. Her expression was flat, her eyes were shut, she had blood running down her head, and her right arm appeared distorted. I rose from my chair and screamed, "Emily!" At that moment, the apparition disappeared. So what's unique about this story is Emily actually didn't die. There was an accident that occurred at the same time as the appearance of the apparition. Emily had gotten into a car accident, and she actually had some head trauma and a broken right arm. So, if we look at the report, it's obvious that the visual image was an apparition and not a ghost, and Emily had not died, but rather had seriously injured herself. And in the report, she's bleeding from her head, and her right arm looks distorted, so obviously those things coincide. But what we have here is Emily going through, obviously, a life-threatening situation, which is an acute emotional event, which sort of triggers this innate abilities that humans may have to sort of send telepathic distress signals. So she somehow sent a signal out into the environment that sort of linked with her husband, and it came across as this sort of distress signal, sort of like R2-D2 shut off the image of Princess Leia. So this telepathic distress signal went out into the environment, linked with John, and it appeared in a sort of a visual apparition. And that's a little bit, that goes back a long time as far as when it comes to researching the apparitions. This idea that apparitions might not just be these disembodied souls who don't go to heaven, but they could be a form of sort of telepathy or psi phenomenon that we talked about earlier. And in the book, I go over the mechanisms that kind of trigger that series of events to happen. So life-threatening events, emotional distress. Obviously, if you're in a car accident and you feel like you're going to die, you're going to be emotionally overwhelmed. That's going to trigger a lot of the changes internally in our body, which sort of send out this message, and then it kind of goes into the environment and it bounces around. And in the book, I really, as you know, I break down all the research behind it. I break down all the facts as far as what may be happening. Or I shouldn't say facts, but my thoughts on what may be happening. And these crisis apparitions, sometimes there are people who died, sometimes they're not. So you really have to look at every one and come up with your own sort of thoughts about what's occurring in these situations.
Yeah, so the thing I find fascinating about this is I think we just talked about it, maybe touched kind of on it a little bit earlier. And I think one of the most fascinating things about your research is that this notion that consciousness is not just an internal thing. It seems that if people are able to telepathically send messages, there kind of seems to be a little bit more, based on some of the research you've done there seems to be a little bit more proof there that there's something outside of just our internal brain functions that are going on that, call it shared consciousness, whatever you want to call it. NDE experiencers, that's another fascinating area. I had Jeff Olson on the show talking about his...
With consciousness, the notion that consciousness is sort of everywhere, and it's not just a subjective experience based on firing neurons in the brain, is not new. There's been a lot of ideas about universal or collective consciousness. This is kind of what Buddhism is about. But consciousness, or the state of awareness, the ability to experience, feel, to be awake, having a sense of selfhood, sort of who we are, what makes us individuals is our consciousness in a way. And the idea that, mainstream science mostly ignores the notion that consciousness may be outside of the brain. But like we talked about before, there is emerging thoughts in neuroscience that suggest that consciousness sort of is like a intrinsic property of everything, sort of similar to gravity. It's maybe all around us. And in the book, I highlight different viewpoints on this. Um, Carl Jung is a prominent psychologist, was pals with Freud back in the day. And he had this idea of collective unconscious, which basically means when we're born, we have some part of our ancestors already sort of built into us. So we're not like a blank screen, if you want to say it like that.
Right.
And he proposed there's parts of our unconscious mind that are common to all humans. And Rupert Sheldrake is a biologist who's very popular nowadays. He has this idea, he kind of expanded on this idea of collective memory or collective conscious. And his idea is that memories aren't so much stored in our brains, but we're more like TV receivers. So, like we all have TVs and we all have sort of probably Netflix and cable and all that. But all the shows that we watch aren't stored on our TV. They're actually gathered from external sources. So, if I break the back of my TV, I don't break all the shows in there. I just break the signal to all the shows. So maybe our brains act similar to that. And that's what Sheldrake talked a lot about. But, there's all kinds of things that happen. If our consciousness is not located inside our brains, that opens the door to these near-death experiences that a lot of people have. That's where they witness themselves as they die. They sort of float above their bodies, and sometimes they float floors above in the hospital and look down at different places. But if consciousness isn't part of our body, then it opens up this ability to sort of communicate at distances. All these paranormal phenomena that we discuss somehow seem to be more reasonable if that's the case. And we talked about before, that's really where a lot of the research is going. If we can better understand what makes us conscious and what makes us individuals and unique, and then we have a better understanding of these paranormal phenomena and what's happening in the environment. So it's all sort of linked in one way. So it's fascinating where it's going. And I think consciousness, for a lot of your listeners who are very interested in paranormal, I think consciousness is a good thing to really brush up on, and how it relates to the paranormal and how it relates to ghostly encounters and consciousness and near-death experiences. Reincarnation is essentially this idea that our consciousness, after we die, sort of goes into something else, another person. All the paranormal phenomenon that's very popular out there sometimes could be the base of it, or is consciousness. And I think for no matter what your education level, consciousness and understanding what consciousness is very important to paranormal phenomena.
Interesting. Yeah. So you mentioned, or you posit another theory in your book, which you term spontaneous apparitional trace theory, or SATT, acronym for short. Could you kind of explain? Can you explain how ghostly encounters come into this in the context of residual hauntings, like haunted houses or haunted buildings?
Yeah, and I listened to a couple of your past shows, and I don't remember if it was the last one or the one before that. You talked about haunted theories, and you guys talked a lot about the imprint theory, or the stone tape theory.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually one of the most popular theories on ghostly encounters. It was kind of developed in the 20s. But essentially that says that the environment holds the memory of a past event, which can be sort of viewed, heard, tasted, smelled, felt by a person with sufficient sensitivity later on. And this theory is often used to explain residual hauntings. So in these hauntings, the ghost is not conscious, more like a recording that's being replayed when it comes to imprint and place theory. So these aren't conscious souls, but rather sort of environmental imprints or videos. So there's never really been an explanation or mechanism to explain how the environment could hold on to these recordings played back. The general belief is there's an extreme amount of energy released during tragic events or death that somehow burned into the environment. So a lot of times when you talk to paranormal investigators, they go into houses where there's usually murders, severe trauma happened there. The idea being that there's so much energy related to this death or murder that it sort of remains around there. But, you know, there's a flaw with the imprint theory, and it's that the tragic event or death must have occurred at a location for a haunting or a haunt-type phenomenon to occur. So therefore, if a location doesn't have this violent history, nothing could be imprinted into the environment.
Right.
It sort of limits the haunting to a location. But unlike this imprint theory, I don't believe that the violent death is what causes sort of this imprint or these residual hauntings, but rather this telepathic distress signal that we talked about before that an individual sends during a traumatic event or violent death, which is imprinted into the environment. So spontaneous apparitional trace theory, or SAT, sort of contends that in every haunted location, there was an individual who sent this telepathic distress call to someone who they were emotionally linked with that's been stuck at the environment. And perhaps it's this distress call that people are picking up on. And I think this sort of accounts for a lot of these recurrent apparitions and hauntings. So, again, it's not the location or the origin of the traumatic event, but sort of the destination as well. So, you know, so this could say that there could be ghostly phenomenon occurring at a house that's, you know, 10 years old or 100 years old. You know, there doesn't really have to be a tragedy that happens in these types of situations. And listen, it's and I say, I don't know if I say it in the book, I think I do, but, you know, there's not one theory that accounts for all paranormal phenomenon across the board.
Right.
Paranormal phenomenon is very, very complex, and there's a lot of things, a lot of variables that go on. So to say that everything paranormal is the result of ghosts or spirits who come back from the dead, I don't think that's right. But to say that my thoughts and theories account for everything is also not right. I think that it's just like if I get, if my arm starts to hurt, it doesn't mean that I'm having a heart attack. It could mean 30 other things. So it's the same thing with paranormal.
Right.
You know, don't approach every encounter differently. I know some people will go in, they're just staunch believers in, you know, ghosts, intelligent hauntings only. You know, there's no such thing as poltergeists or recurrent spontaneous psychokinetic activity. There's no such thing as residuals. There's no such thing as psi. They're just staunch believers in intelligent haunting. And and I think that limits them to some degree. So when you look at any sort of phenomenon, I think it's important to gather all the information and to treat every case individually and come up with something. I've been in cases where I can't explain it with my theories. It goes outside that. If I'm in a place and there's, you know, plates being thrown off the wall, obviously telepathy and, you know, this imprint stuff is not feasible.
Right.
A little bit more than that. So I think we all, in my experience, sometimes if you've been investigating paranormal for so long and someone asks you a question and you don't have an answer, you feel there's a lot of pressure to come up with something. But from what I found doing a lot of these interviews and talking after the book, it's okay to say I don't know.
Right.
Or I'll look into that.
Right, and a lot of things, I think that's what we should be saying in a lot of cases is we just don't know, but that's one of the reasons why we're doing this. We're looking for the answers, we just don't have them right now. But it's interesting, you talk about imprint theory, I think it's also called stone tape theory. This is one that's always been a hard one for me to wrap my brain around, and one that a lot of people in paranormal field or paranormal circles that just you know, kind of blindly accept that theory. I've had a difficult time with that one. I think you've already pointed out some of the reasons why that something in the environment just happens to capture this like a recording. But I thought you provided a lot more interesting insight into what could be happening. That this kind of telepathic message may be captured in the environment.
Off, like the stone tape theory was like, well, it's absorbed into the stones in the house or the castle or whatever's going on, and that was a little far fetched. But listen, there's a lot of research out there that says that, you know, that the environment, you know, could hold on to a lot of this information. Whether it's consciousness or parts of us that sort of survive after death, and that sometimes people can just sort of, resonate with that or get in tune with that.
Right.
So it's like radio signals. There's millions of radio signals all around us all the time. But if I tune my car radio to 92.3, I'm going to pick up 92.3, and that's the music I'm going to pick up.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that all these other radio signals aren't around me. So, that's a form of resonance. You're resonating with that channel because you're moving you're aligning frequency. The paranormal and haunted phenomena, hauntings and ghosts and crisis apparition, I think there's a form of that resonating or matching frequency. The problem is that we, as things go on here, we really haven't figured out what that is, or how to make that happen consistently and reliably. So if I have a plant, and if I have a seed, and I just water it every day, I know that plant's going to grow. But with the paranormal, I don't know what variables really go into having a paranormal experience. So that's really what you have to do in research, is try to figure out, what correlates with paranormal experience? Why are there some people that have more? Why is it that these people have more experiences? Looking at case examples, why does this happen? So then you can narrow down these variables and come up with a better idea. And that's what my theories are. I've narrowed down a lot of these variables and come up with my own theories. Now, are they 100% right, like I said before? Absolutely not. They still don't account for everything.
Interesting. So you mentioned intelligent hauntings. As a paranormal investigator, I'd say, there's been times I think that I've had some sort of evidence, whether it's an EVP or, when I say evidence, I use that loosely, the sensation of being touched, that sort of thing. That has happened to me before. I've captured EVPs that some would call, in the range of Class A. Very, very clear vocal tone, that sort of thing, where it seems to be saying something in relation. I'm holding a flashlight in one case. The voice sounds like it's saying time to turn off the flashlight. And as I let another investigator hear this, they heard the exact same thing without me telling them what I heard. So to me, that kind of lends some, kind of points in the direction of intelligent haunting. They seem to be interacting with something you're doing. A lot of your theories, I think, that you present in the book really kind of go towards the more the residual type stuff. What is your thoughts on that kind of... Now, I know there may be some people claiming they're having intelligent, intelligent haunt type experiences. There may be other explanations for that. Aside from that, kind of what's your thoughts on, the intelligent hauntings?
Yeah, if you get an EVP, if there seems to be, like you said, it's other people are hearing the same thing. I think that's an avenue to really explore. The idea that there's no way to rule out the idea that ghosts exist, or there's these disembodied spirits that are out there. That could be happening. And listen, from all the stories I've heard over the years, there's a lot of people have these types of experiences, these intelligent hauntings. There's a couple in the book that I have. I have one guy that his wife passed away, and he was walking down the steps one time. He'd been looking for these Halloween decorations, and he was walking down the steps, and his wife appeared to him and said, "Look behind the workbench." He looked behind the workbench, and there, lo and behold, there's the decoration he was looking for. So that's the type of intelligent haunting, and it's something it's an experience that I heard from somebody, and it's something that I think is a valid experience. And when I come across anyone, I just challenge them to figure out, sit down and think, why is that happening? How can that be happening? Is that person's consciousness somehow communicating through this EVP or this electronic machine that you have? And if that's the case, does that mean that person is just sitting in that room, hanging out all day, every day, waiting for someone to put an EVP in front of them? Why? All these questions that really go along with something like that. That's really where what makes paranormal so interesting is that, trying to figure out, it's almost like a big mystery or puzzle, trying to figure out the series of events that happen. So what do I think? I think that that's perfectly fine. I've heard numerous accounts of that. I would never, I've learned a long time ago, you don't discount people's experiences because, number one, it's rude. But
Sure.
number two, an experience is a life-changing and important event for everyone who has these paranormal experiences. And to sit there and say, well, I have all these degrees, so I'm going to tell you, well, you're misinterpreting, or you're filling in words that weren't there, or you're, whatever else the skeptical or debunkers are going to say. I don't know if you can really discount someone's experience, just like I can't say, well, you don't love your daughter or wife. It's a subjective experience and a subjective feeling. There's no way to quantify or objectify something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting because there is a lot of thought out there in you want to call it academic circles, whatever the case may be, that any kind of paranormal experience can ultimately be explained rationally, some way, shape, or form. Maybe we just haven't been able to, as of yet, explain it.
It's like you have someone who has an experience. Let's say they wake up and, they wake up and there's a vision of their aunt, and then they find out later that the aunt had died. Listen, I can go in and say, well, this was just someone's overactive imagination. They made it up, or they misremembered, or or I can keep going on and on. But I think that's, I don't know, to me that's really not what's helpful in the field, to just discount people or debunk things. I think you gather the information, and I think, you kind of go from there with it. Telling somebody that their experience is false, or that they misremembered, or they're misinterpreting, or they're flat out, crazy, does nothing to help things. It only probably makes there more tension. It's like politics,
Right.
Everyone has their own subjective view of things.
No, and I think you touched on some very good points in the book, though. You really have to try and think about this critically, and really try and be as objective as possible. That's one of the things we try to do, and people I work with as paranormal investigators. Try to take the emotion out of it. It's not easy to do. You can't always take the emotion out of it. But, as much as possible, we are trying to objectively evaluate what's going on around us, what the noises are around us. And you touch on some things in the book. If somebody's going through a significant emotional experience, they just lost a loved one, they're trying to cope. Maybe they have coping mechanisms that kick in. I certainly think there's plenty of rational explanations out there for some of the paranormal experiences. I just know personally I've had some that I certainly have of yet to being able to kind of explain rationally. Now, those kinds of experiences are, they're not that frequent. They happen, occasionally, but they're the ones that kind of, maybe I could liken it to, going golfing and you hit that great golf shot and it keeps you coming back. Well, these are the kind of experiences I would say that kind of keep me coming back as a paranormal investigator, because I'm going, wait, I've tried to, and I've even tried to talk myself out of situations that I've experienced, and so there's no way that could have happened, but it did. It did happen, and I was not the only person who experienced this. There was another investigator there. So, those sorts of things that kind of keep me coming back, and I think what's, will keep me in the field, it's just this kind of things that are fascinating, and I just can't come up with a logical explanation. Doesn't mean there isn't one. It's just, there doesn't.
And I think that's like you said, the passion for the paranormal, the name of the podcast.
Right.
That's a great place to go with it. Being objective is really where you want to be, because you can kind of look at both sides believers and skeptics, but you kind of stay in that middle ground, and I think it's a good headspace to be in. And listen, there's a lot of things that don't fall into the rational explanations, and trying to find out the answers to these things is it's amazing, it's fun, it's amazing, it's motivational, it's all these things, and that's what gets a lot of people up in the morning. It's what gets me up in the morning. It's why I'm reading all these books and I'm doing all this research, and I go to sometimes these haunted locations, is because I can't explain a lot of these situations that happen to people, these experiences that happen to people.
Right.
Now, my theories, like you said, kind of are on this idea of telepathy and psi-based, but I do explain haunted locations with that. But just because it's not a ghost per se that's causing this experience doesn't mean it's not as cool or as interesting. Having this psi or this residual or whatever else is happening is still a paranormal thing to investigate. And I think there's a lot of groups that are just looking for ghosts. But there's other paranormal things that happen. There's, the telepathies and the psi phenomenon. That's just as cool. Don't discount that type of stuff.
Right.
And that's kind of what I say at the end of the book is, learn about this parapsychology, learn how it relates to some of these ghostly encounters, and does it explain all of them? Absolutely not. But I think it opens people's eyes to other explanations or theories about what could be happening.
Absolutely, and one of the things I've noticed in the field, especially for those that are, I don't like the term ghost hunting. I never have. I don't think that lends credibility to the field, and I'm yet to go out and hunt and capture or kill a ghost. So I don't know why we're using that term. It just kind of got thrown out there. I don't know if it became famous with the show Ghost Hunters, but even going back to that show, the name of the group was the Transatlantic Paranormal Society. It's just what sci-fi, I think, wanted to go with. But that term just gets used out there so often. I wish, because just what you touched on, I mean, there's so much to the paranormal, and that's really what this show is about, is exploring all aspects of the paranormal, not just ghostly encounters and that sort of thing. So there's so much else out there. It's so... there's so many different types of things out there. We already touched about near-death experiences and telepathy, all that kind of stuff, UFOs, and there's just so many other things out there to explore. So, and this is just a small piece of it, but there is a lot of people using the term paranormal just as narrowly to apply to ghostly encounters or hauntings or that sort of thing. So, and I think you just touched on it.
Yeah.
It's much broader than that. Unfortunately, it's being thrown out there just in more of a narrow definition. There's just so much more out there to explore. Absolutely, I totally agree. Do you have any thoughts on poltergeist activity and any of the research that you've done in parapsychology?
Yeah, most of the stuff that I'll say this first off, I've never ever come across any poltergeist activity, witnessed to or been in a location that anything like that's happened. But a lot of the stuff that I read about it, they tie it a lot to psychokinesis. And psychokinesis, or PK, is sort of this ability of our mind to sort of move objects or interact with the external environment to move objects. Sort of like, I guess, the Jedis would move things with their mind.
Using the Force.
But, so psychokinesis is something that's studied in parapsychology. And what I found is probably over the last 20-some years, maybe 20, 25 years, they've gone away from poltergeist being a spirit to more poltergeist being related to a person sort of manipulating the environment, and whether it's throwing dishes off the counter or having objects thrown across the room or whatever the situation is. So they've really moved away from poltergeist being that. I don't know. I'll be honest. The jury's still out for me on psychokinesis. I don't know if we have the ability to sort of do these types of things. But as a whole, you know, I think that our minds can do a lot more than we think they can. You know, there's a lot of studies out there where people can sort of, just by thinking, produce changes in random number generators. So random number generators, basically it does like a 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. And what happens is you should get just as many zeros as you do ones when you run this thing, like flipping a coin. You should get 50% of the time it should be heads, 50% of the time tails. Number generators are the same thing, 0, 1, 0, 1. It should be 50% zeros, 50% ones. If people really consciously think about changing the only getting one, what they find is that maybe 70% of the time it's a 1 and then 30% is a 0. So why is that happening? It shouldn't happen that way. By chance, it shouldn't do that. So maybe there is some point ability to sort of, through intention, change the environment or change external objects in a way. There's the Global Consciousness Project, which sort of shows that if a lot of people are focused on one thing, like a tragedy like 9/11 or a hurricane, these random number generators that they have going throughout the world go from being random to having a pattern. So collectively, if we all focus on something, we seem to move these random number generators as well. But that's a very small change, and it's not throwing plates across the room. So I don't really know the answer to poltergeist. I want to start looking more into that phenomenon. Now that the book's done and I'm sort of winding down from talking about the book, I'm probably going to move into other topics to write about. Poltergeist might be one of them.
So the guest I had on last month, William Hall, he did a lot of research, and I believe you know him. He did a lot of research into the Lindley Street poltergeist case. Quite fascinating. It is one, you know, again, I don't know what the research points to. I really haven't delved into it a whole lot either. But it is... it is the PK theory is one that I personally feel like is kind of a difficult one to accept. Although again, I'm not the person that's done, you know, the research into it, and I'm sure there's a lot of, you know, very smart people in your field that are researching it that may still accept that theory. So
yeah, I mean, there is some research suggesting it's there, but it's so small and so minute. You know, that it's not like on a macro level, it's more on a micro level. But, you know, like with William Hall, if I'm sitting in a haunted location and, you know, portraits start flying all over the room, all the research I've read in the past sometimes might go right out the window, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, we kind of prepare ourselves for situations, but if I'm presented with something like that, you know, and it's that one experience that could sort of change my viewpoint and make me really look deeper into some of the things that are going on. So I'm willing to admit that.
Right.
But yeah, it's a fascinating, you know, like you said, TK, I think the jury's out on that one. I don't think you're alone in that. Because if as humans, if we have the ability to sort of move things or change things with our minds, you know, who knows what that could mean for people we don't like.
Right. It could be pretty nasty for them. You touch on this in the book as well. I just wonder if you could expound on it a little bit about the role you think energy, electricity, and electromagnetic fields play in ghostly encounters. Yeah.
I have a whole chapter, well, actually more than a chapter on that type of information, because I think it's so prevalent now in the paranormal investigating field. EMF meters, electricity, energy. These seem to be things that are mentioned on pretty much every ghost hunting show, as well as most blogs and Facebooks and all this other stuff that's out there. And there's a lot of misinformation when it comes to how EMFs really relate to paranormal experiences. And in the book, I try to give a better answer about exactly what's going on, but it's such a hard thing to do. But there are a great many things that have electrical and magnetic fields. So that's toasters, street lamps, TVs, whatever. When we think about it, electricity and electrical fields, we think inanimate objects, which sort of need this source of power, like batteries or electricity to function. But, humans and animals also have electrical and magnetic fields as well. So any involvement of humans also includes the involvement of electricity, as our thoughts, our emotions, our movements, they're all sort of this collection of electrical signals. So this is pretty important when we think about it. So if we think about all the paranormal experiences that happened in the past, there's one thing that's pretty constant in all those experiences, and that's that a human has to be present to experience an apparition, a poltergeist, an hearing, feeling, temperature change, any sort of haunt type or psi experience. So if there's always a human present, there's always electricity, electrical fields, and magnetic fields present during a paranormal experience. So this is important, and I want to stress that. So electricity does play a role in paranormal phenomenon. Electromagnetic fields do play a role in paranormal phenomenon. Where these EMF meters really became so prevalent, I'm not exactly sure. There was research in the past by a neurologist out of Canada, Michael Persinger, and a thing called the God helmet, which sort of sparked a lot of interest in this. Basically, what he did was he put this is a very crude explanation, but he put a motorcycle helmet with these electrodes and sort of shot electricity into certain parts of the brain. And when he did that, he found that people were having these paranormal experiences, sense of a presence, apparitions, those types of things. And, back then it was kind of like, well, we figured out why people were having ghosts. It's just electricity in their brains. And then it kind of went all the way from there to, he would go out to people's houses and he would find sometimes these complex fluctuating EMF fields around that could be causing these paranormal experiences. And then somehow it got to the point where paranormal investigators started noticing these fluctuating EMF fields when they were having ghostly encounters. So it all got sort of mumbo-jumbo together a little bit. And in the book I go over all the latest research into it. With paranormal investigators, listen, if you have a fluctuating EMF field and you're standing next to a fuse box, or a high field and you're standing next to a fuse box or a dishwasher or AC, that's to be expected. But a lot of these paranormal investigators will say they get these abnormal readings sort of walking through the house like a person, or out of the blue for no apparent reason. And that's really where the paranormal phenomenon comes from. So I tackle that in the book as well. And I really go over this idea of, what's going on? What could be happening with EMFs and paranormal phenomenon? And every time I go to the conferences and I speak, every time I whether it's a paranormal conference or different types of conferences, I always get asked a lot about EMFs. And, any TV show, you can't go a reality show without having someone with an EMF meter as well. So this is an important, it's an important topic. A lot of people have thoughts and theories on it. Every paranormal investigation team has a tech guy, and every conference that I go to, there's somebody talking about the latest equipment and how it relates. And I provide some more viewpoints on that in the book, and then that's all we're doing, right? We're just providing viewpoints and backing it, hopefully, with some type of research that's out there.
And it seems to indicate in the book that there's kind of based on the research on EMF fields, some of it may be the God helmet, tests that were done. and other tests, is there kind of a sweet spot that kind of has this, significant, let me back up, I almost said emotional, I didn't mean to say that, that's the wrong word, that has this kind of a hallucinatory effect on the brain that maybe causes people to experience stuff that they think is paranormal that may be attributed to the EMF, EMF fields?
It's between 10 milligauss and 40 milligauss, but the fields have to be what they call complex and fluctuating, which means sort of up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. There's a certain frequency that's associated with it. So complex, fluctuating fields, usually between 10 milligauss and 40 milligauss, over an extended period of time will elicit sense of presence or these ghost-type phenomenon that are happening. And what's unique is, I know I've heard numerous stories from teams that say, well, we went to this place, we took EMF readings, we found that there was a fan or a clock that was emitting these overwhelming EMF fields. Once we removed that, there was no more reports of ghosts. So they essentially found something that was eliciting these sort of phenomena from happening. But 10 milligauss to 40 milligauss, we actually encounter that pretty frequently throughout the day. To give your readers or your listeners an idea, if you walk through your house with an EMF meter, it should really be below 3 milligauss. Now, if you're standing next to a fuse box, it's going to be really, really high. So the fuse box could sometimes get up to 600 milligauss, depending on what's going on. But, sometimes your AC or your dishwasher or something like that could have high milligauss. But, you do come in contact with this 10 milligauss throughout the day. So it's not something that we don't come across. It's not something abnormal. So an extended period of time with that could cause these experiences. But, I think that's a viable reason to have an EMF meter in some of these paranormal investigations to rule that type of thing out. But when it comes to ghosts, like I've talked to numerous paranormal investigator teams, and there's really not a sweet spot for paranormal activity. They say it's somewhere between 2 and 7 milligauss, but it has to be fluctuating and it has to move haphazardly, like a person walking through a house.
Right.
And again, 2 milligauss to 7 milligauss is not that. You're going to find that in your house. I could probably have 2 to 7 milligauss right in front of me right now.
Right.
So that's not abnormal as well.
Yeah, and I guess it depends on the sensitivity of the equipment you're using. Millimeter is a typical tool we use. I think you did touch on something there, though. I think more than anything, if you're going to use the equipment, one way to do it is to try and at least come up with, if you're getting high EMF readings and they happen to be within that kind of frequency range, which to me, I've used them, it doesn't seem like you get those high of readings between 10 and 30. They're usually, for me, they're usually between 1 and 10, sometimes a 5, a 6, a 7. Every once in a while you get a high reading. But it could be, yeah, sure. That's one of the things you could say, well, this could be causing people to see shadows or feel that somebody's standing behind them or somebody's watching them. Like you said, I think the important thing, though, is this is probably prolonged exposure to the EMF that's going to cause it. If you're just sitting there, in front of a microwave or something like that for, 30 seconds to a minute, it's probably not, going to have that kind of impact.
And a lot of times I've seen recently people have been trying to introduce electricity into the environment to cause a paranormal experience.
Right, the EMF pumps. Yes.
Yeah, so they have, I can't remember what they're called, these little machines that shoot out huge amounts of electricity into the air, thinking it's going to give the ghosts enough energy to manifest themselves.
Right.
I don't think that's a good idea, because what you're doing is you're changing the environment and you're pumping more EMF into the environment, which
could be affecting you as well.
Hours, you're probably going to start feeling weird. You're going to probably start being nauseous or get a headache or dizziness, and that could be misinterpreted as a paranormal experience. So sometimes you're causing your own paranormal experience.
Yeah, I always thought those were kind of a weird concept too. I think they call them EM poems.
It's like, you know, it's counterproductive in a way. You're in a circle there.
Yeah.
So anytime there's a report of a paranormal experience, you want to keep all the variables the same as when the experience occurred. So flooding the environment with EMFs and flooding the environment with whatever else people are flooding it with, you're not keeping it to where the experience occurred. And if you're flooding with EMFs, you're probably causing paranormal experiences that happen to yourself just because of exposure to those high levels. I think it was a television show where one guy was introducing, I can't remember what he said, there's an exorbitant amount of electricity in the environment, and then they started having these experiences, and I said, you're causing them.
You're probably causing your own experiences. Yeah, that was always kind of a bizarre piece of equipment to me, too.
But that's, you know, you go in, and you kind of, anytime you get a piece of equipment, you figure out what's going on, and, you know, simply typing in effects of prolonged exposure to EMFs, and you're going to come up with headaches, dizziness, you know, I can't remember, skin sensitivity. There's other things that happen to it.
Even nausea,
sometimes parallel paranormal phenomena.
Do you have any advice for somebody who's looking at going into the field of parapsychology?
Oh, boy. I would say this is going to sound horrible, but I would say get a degree where there's an ability to sort of sustain yourself in, and then pursue parapsychology. So, you know, my 9 to 5 is doing more clinical work. I don't really get paid for researching parapsychology. The only way you would is if you were a professor or academic doing research at a university. So there's not a lot of job opportunities for parapsychologists outside of research, and in the United States, there's very few positions that do that. So what a lot of the parapsychologists will do is they'll get degrees in psychology or whatever, medicine, engineering, and then get a stable sort of job, and then do parapsychology on a sort of like as a hobby in a way, if you want to think about it like that. But if you're really interested in parapsychology, you got to find some universities that have some courses. Sometimes you have to go overseas if you're really interested in it. You know, finding something that you're passionate about is an important part of life. And as most paranormal investigators know, sometimes the things that you're most passionate about, you might not get paid for.
Right.
But in order to pursue your passion, you have to have a source of income and ability to sort of, you know, feed yourself. So I would say, you know, get a stable background in other sciences, whether it's engineering, psychology, medicine. You know, there's numerous other disciplines to get a solid background in, get a job there, and then sort of pursue parapsychology after that. That's kind of how I did it. I did it after I got the degrees in the clinical part.
So, you know, we touched on, I think, a little bit, but how do you see, so in the paranormal field, there's been so much media hype in recent years, the TV shows, you know, it's just, like you said, it's coming more into mainstream media. Do you think this has been helpful for the larger study and understanding of paranormal phenomena, or do you think it's hurt it more?
You know, the ghost shows don't necessarily hurt the field, as they bring awareness to the paranormal, and also they provide entertainment. You know, when I was growing up, there was no ghost shows.
Right.
And, you know, it was looked upon kind of like a weird thing to be into ghosts and parapsychology. I know I used to go, I used to hide the books that I read on parapsychology. You know, and I remember my girlfriend found it one time in high school, and she's like, what's this? Is this ghost? What is this? I said, I was holding that for a friend. You know, like it was a fad. So with these shows, there's more awareness. There's more, it's more out there in the open, so people feel more comfortable pursuing things. I had to go about pursuing my interest in the paranormal sort of behind the scenes. And it wasn't until I wrote this book that most of the people knew I was even interested in paranormal and parapsychology. So I think there's some benefit to the show. There's some support gathered from it. There's feeling like you're not alone by watching maybe shows where other people are having these experiences.
Right.
So there are a lot of benefits to it. But over the last, 3-4 years, I think there's just been an explosion in these paranormal teams. The YouTube shows, the live investigations, the live feed websites. And I think pumping the brakes wouldn't be a bad thing a little bit, because you're just going to overflow. You're going to overwhelm people, and they're going to get bored with it.
Yeah.
So now having a ghostly encounter that's positive and life-changing is not enough. Now it has to be a demon telling you that he's going to kill you. You know what I'm saying? So
right.
What fascinated us 15 years ago is now boring.
Yeah, I think.
What does it go out to?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. I agree. I mean, you know, one of the first shows that came out, I think was probably the most credible, and that was, you know, aside from the name of the show, Ghost Hunters, you know, TAPS, or the Atlantic Paranormal Society, I think their approach was the most realistic. And, you know, especially early on in the show, it was, you know, hey, we found no evidence of there being a haunting here, and they would get with the clients and kind of explain what was going on. But I think you're right. It's just this sensationalism and this play on fear and, you know, everything, especially with some of the newer shows, you know, everything's demonic, it's dark, it's, you know, they keep trying to up the ante here. And I think in that sense it is hurting the field, in my personal opinion, because I think, you know, it's more about ratings and getting people to watch the show than it is about truly exploring. And yeah, I think you're right. I mean, you know, you can only sometimes that's what people want to hear.
Yeah, and even the teams that don't have quote unquote shows, you know, they're looking for hits, they're looking for likes, they're looking for followers, which is not horrible. I mean, we all kind of want that, but you know, there's a lot of stuff out there that, you know, and sometimes I think there might be some pressure to not commit fraud, but to maybe exaggerate. And
right.
That hurts the field as well.
Absolutely.
Because if a skeptic or someone gets a hold of a picture that's obviously faked, that can discredit not only that team, but all the other teams who might have got photos that are legit and unexplainable, and it keeps people from from putting things out. You know, so it's just a ripple effect sometimes.
Right.
So pumping the brakes isn't a bad thing. That's kind of how I see it. I think that, you know, there's a lot of avenues as far as paranormal research goes or investigating goes that could be changed for the beneficial. But, you know, the shows themselves, as long as you look at it as entertainment and not educational, that's okay.
Right.
You know, don't get your science from these shows. Get your entertainment from these shows, or get some support from these shows.
Well, we get our science from people like you. We get the science side of it from the parapsychologists, but the shows, yeah, they are, and I have to agree. That's, you got to take them with a grain of salt and just say, hey, this is entertainment, and that's.
But hey, I watch the shows, and some of them are really fun to watch, and you know, I'll get swept up in it as well. That's cool. That's great. So I don't get on a soapbox and say they're horrible. I just, again, pump the brakes, be cautious. It's not educational. Enjoy it.
Right.
Like watching a movie.
Well, one of the things I like that you touched on towards the end of the book was how paranormal experiences for the you know, the people that are not experiencing mental illness and that sort of thing, and people who tend to be rational and seem to be, you know, perfectly normal, have a kind of experience that, you know, I think that's kind of where it's been for me when this first opened up to me. It's kind of expanded my horizons and my interest in it. But maybe you could touch on that a little bit more, because I know you do touch on the positive aspect of this towards the end of the book.
Can you repeat that? You cut out a little bit there, Kurt.
Yeah, so towards the end of the book, you kind of touched on how paranormal some people who have had paranormal experiences kind of, you know, have positive aspects of it. And I was just wondering if you could kind of touch a little bit more on that.
Yeah. And there's actually been some research that say that, you know, if you have this life-changing event that sort of opens your mind to the possibility of there being something more to life, that could be a positive coping thing for a lot of people. And these experiences can actually bring about feelings of content, happiness, being intrigued about life after death, a comfort associated with it for people who might have passed on, or when we do pass on, some comfort associated with what's going to happen. So there's a lot of positive things that come from these paranormal ghostly encounters that happen. And like I said before, it's often viewed as a horrible experience that, you know, causes people to decompensate, become depressed, and so forth and so on. But like I said, there's a lot of people who actually, these experiences are beneficial to them for the rest of their lives. And, you know, I think that's often overlooked. And, you know, I don't know why that is, but usually the people I come in contact with, whether it's conferences or just talking over the phone or book signings or whatever, the paranormal or having a paranormal experiences has actually improved their lives. And it's made them more passionate about things, whether it's the paranormal or whether it's other aspects of things like religion, philosophy, consciousness, whatever. It's motivated them to seek answers and be content that what happens after we pass on might not be horrible.
So then the flip side of that is, and you touch on this a little bit as well, skeptics correlate oftentimes ghostly encounters, you already mentioned this a little bit, with, you know, they attribute it with mental illness. And I'm just curious, with your background, you've got a lot of years of experience in clinical psychology. So kind of what's your take on mental illness aspect of the paranormal?
I mean, you're going to have some people who have significant mental health issues, which involve hallucinations, delusions, these types of things. But not necessarily, I mean, obviously not all paranormal experiences are the result of some type of mental illness. When it comes to experiences, I don't necessarily think you could. I think mental illness could explain a very low percentage of reported paranormal phenomena, an extremely low percentage. And usually people with significant mental health conditions you could identify fairly quickly. You know, if you're part of a paranormal investigating team and you go into a house, I think that's a place to be cautious to do that, because you may be walking into a situation that is a little above your head as far as how to maintain, or how to really manage a situation where you come in contact with someone with significant delusions and hallucinations. And by telling them there's a ghost or a demon in their house, you will definitely ramp up those delusions, and it could get to the point where, you know, it could seriously negatively affect that person. But when I talk to people who have paranormal experiences, there's no really significant mental health issues with them. I mean, listen, every person in the world has been sad or depressed or worried or anxious, right?
Right.
So, you know, we all encounter that in our lives. You know, so mental illness, as far as the outliers like untreated schizophrenia and things like that, I don't think they account for very much paranormal phenomenon. So whenever I hear skeptics say, well, he must be crazy, it gets me angry because that's not the case.
Right.
And it's an easy cop out for a lot of people just to say, well, that person's crazy. That's why they had that experience.
Right. It's an easy way for them to explain it. Convenient answer.
Yeah. It's ignorant for if you come across skeptics or even whoever who says that stuff. It's just an ignorant statement.
Well, any new research you have, or any new books you may be coming out with here in the near future?
I don't have anything. I'm working on a new book, but I'm not. I'm just working on an outline of it. I don't really know where I'm going with it. I don't know what's happening. It took me 6 years to write the ghost studies, so I'm a bit lazy.
That's kind of human nature.
It takes me a while to get around to writing things. So, an outline could take a normal person a day to write and get to be coherent. It may take me like 4 months to get an outline together. So I'm just moving slowly. So I do some appearances and I do some conferences and talk about the book and the theories that I have, and that keeps me busy. So nothing new on the horizon right now. Hopefully in a year I'll have something out there and seeking to get published.
So if people want to find more information out about your work, where can they go?
I have a website. It's called hauntedtheories.com. Hauntedtheories.com. They can find me on Facebook at Haunted Theories and Twitter at Haunted Theories as well. Haunted Theories was the original name of my book, and then the publisher changed it to the Ghost Studies, which I actually like better, but I had already made all the Twitter and Facebook and the website addresses. So Haunted Theories is where you can find that. That's also where my appearances are. I have a blog on there that I talk about just stuff going on in the paranormal on Haunted Theories as well that you can read up on. And that's the easiest way to find me. If you want to get a hold of me, you can get a hold of me through the website or on Facebook and Twitter. If you just direct message me, that's the best way to get a hold of me as well. The book you can get on Amazon. You can get it at Barnes & Noble, the brick and mortar stores. If you like listening to books, you can download it on Audible as well. It's not that expensive, so give it a shot.
Yeah, and again, the book is, the 2017 book is The Ghost Studies, New Perspectives on the Origins of Paranormal Experiences. Brandon, thank you so much for being on the show with me. It's been a pleasure. Really, really enjoyed the book, and hopefully some of the listeners out there will get a copy of the book and check it out. Really kind of opened up my mind to some of the possibilities of what's going on with haunted phenomena and ghostly encounters. And so very, very great work you did on there, and I appreciate you again coming on the show talking with me, and hopefully we'll be able to get you back on the show down the road and talk again.
Yeah, thanks. It was a great conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks again for having me, Kurt.
You bet. Thank you, Brandon, and have a great night. I enjoyed it.
Thanks.
All right, so I hope you really enjoyed that interview with Brandon. I thought it was an amazing discussion. Again, the book is The Ghost Studies, New Perspectives on the Origins of Paranormal Experiences. If you go to my Facebook page at facebook.com/passion4 the paranormal, you can find a link to Amazon. They'll link you directly to Amazon to purchase his book. And it is a reasonably priced book, and I guarantee you will enjoy the book. There's a lot of interesting accounts in there, but more importantly, Brandon provides some fresh perspective on and theories on what may be going on with paranormal experiences and ghostly encounters. And I just thought it was an amazing book. I really enjoyed the discussion and some of his thought processes on what people may be experiencing and what may be going on with some of these encounters. So again, pick up a copy of the book. You won't be disappointed. I really enjoyed the book. All right, so as I mentioned before, if you are using the iTunes app, if you could please head on over and offer a review of the show. And I know I beat this drum a lot, but it is so very important to help move the show forward. It's going to help people out there to find the show, because there are people out there looking for paranormal shows to tune into, and there's thousands of them out there. And I really do think I provided some great content. I have some great guests on the show. So do me a favor and just spend 1 minute and head over there and offer a review. I'd really appreciate it. All right, so again, I hope you really enjoyed tonight's show. Join me next month. There's going to be another great guest on the show. So I've got Larry Holcomb joining me on the show, talking about his 2015 book, Presidents and UFOs. So that's going to be a great, great show. He's going to be getting into discussion about what he thinks may be going on and what presidents know about UFO activity. So it's going to be great to go back and talk again about a UFO topic. I'm excited about that one. So hopefully you'll tune in next month for that show as well. And once again, thank you for tuning in tonight for the show, and I'll look forward to the next show with you. All right, have a great night.